Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about building software as a product and using a methodology that treats the software like a product so that you get the best results. And I'm going to start with a bunch of product about why it's a product, and then we're going to go into like exactly what you need to do as a developer and a development team to keep that in mind and modify your process so you can iterate really fast and build great products. I don't think there's anything special about California or Silicon Valley, but this is the sort of thing that people there are doing. So I wanted to bring some of this here to add to the great work that's going on here, and maybe you guys can find some usefulness out of it. Okay, so the first thing is this idea of SaaS. The S is for a service, but it's not really a service. This word is kind of wrong. It's that if we're building software, it's much more like the washing machine than the laundry service. You want this thing to work automatically. You want it to never need servicing. You want it not to be special. Everyone gets the same one, and they make their own controls and modifications. It's really not a service. And the more software is like a service, the harder it is to code, the more complex the code, the more complex the deployment process, just the higher cost to run it. And you find software that is written to be a service oftentimes not succeeding in the market. The other thing that is becoming surprisingly important is to have a high amount of diversity on a team. So on a product team, it really, really matters to have extremely diverse team because they're going to spot things and they bring different skills and different viewpoints to the product that is for everybody. If you were just building a piece of code, all you'd need is a bunch of like young, straight white guys to sit in a room and write working code. But when you think about it as a product, there really is a huge advantage, and there's been a lot of studies in Silicon Valley about, especially by Salesforce, Apple, Google, about the actual number of bugs that are reduced when you have women on the team, and people of color, and people who are not traditionally on software teams. And there's a whole slew of reasons why this stuff works. The other thing is that a development team is not just developers anymore. More and more, it's all about the user experience. So your designers are part of your team. Managers who approve things. Increasingly, legal has to evaluate stuff really early so that it can be released. And then, of course, the developers are super important too, but they don't work on a team unless they're communicating with the other people. So I'm going to show you, like on a code level in GitHub, how all these people can communicate. This is also true for the industry. So you have some companies that are extremely high financed, like Google or Apple and Amazon. We hear about these people all the time. But that often isn't where the real innovation occurs. The real innovation often occurs in small companies that are extremely resource constrained, and they find really creative ways to build these products. And then they often sell themselves to Apple or Google, who couldn't figure it out themselves. So like the software universe needs both types of teams that are highly financed, teams that are resource constrained. And I'll show you how that factors in. Okay, so the landscape for SaaS. This is, over the past 3 years, certainly over the past 5 years, this landscape has become just exceptionally noisy. There are so many products, there are so many players, they appear and disappear at an incredibly high rate, and there's an increasing demand for a high degree of iteration. If software is released like twice a week, for some venues like the media, that's actually slow. So you're releasing software every day, 4 times a day. Heroku releases software about 3 or 4 times a day. Bug fixes, features, modifications. And what's interesting now is that there's incredible security concerns. I'd say over the past 2 years, and you have to build that into your development process. It's not something you can like innovate, worry about security at the end. That obviously does not work. So all of this adds up to product agility. I love Oreo Company because they are always releasing horrible new products that are just designed to maybe stick, like Red Velvet Oreo, or fail. And they just release and they see what fails, and then they just cancel it. But they have like a core methodology. You know what an Oreo is. They know how to make these things in the factory so they can pump out new versions and try them in the marketplace and see which have what's called market pull. When you guys are building software and you release it, you can kind of feel the market pull. You feel people hitting the website. You feel people downloading it. If you don't feel the market pull, all the push in the world is not going to help. And you know these other things. Be very, very fast. And importantly, be ready to integrate. Because like it or not, there are big players like Google Calendar or GitHub in the DevOps industry, where you're obligated to integrate with the biggest player in the industry, and you have to build that into your development methodology. This means that that remote service will have APIs that you have to keep up with, and you have code dependencies that rely on those APIs. They'll have to be separate and testable in your continuous delivery process. So things that sound like, oh, only the product guys worry about this, it's actually the developers that need to worry about it and change their process to match it. Of course, scale, which is much easier now because everything is in the cloud, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so this is what we're going to come to at the end, that all of this stuff that sounds like it's for marketing and product, it's actually for DevOps, and DevOps sort of leads and drives the process. So when you're starting a new company, when you have a mid-sized company, when you have a large company that's trying to innovate, you want to put resources where your value add is. So a lot of times it's purely in the user experience. There isn't a lot, in many cases the app is just a layer of user experience on top of code that is the same function that's being performed by a competitor. It's just whose user experience is better. And features and user experience are really linked. So you should spend all of your money, all of your pizzas on experience design. Software design is really important too. Your code base is your value. And what I mean by that is more and more, we heard Christian talk this morning about like very complex image recognition services and how you can sew these into your app rather than building them. That's part of the software design. What's the core stuff we're going to build? How are we going to deliver our user interface? And then what are the key core services we're going to depend on? And in what ecosystem will they reside? Are we going to be using all Google services? Are we going to be using all Amazon services? Also, we're spending tons of time on. Interestingly, the actual development of the software is sort of in the middle. There's a lot of stuff that you can outsource, and you do not want to outsource people writing your code, I don't think. I think certainly not for innovation. But you do want to outsource people working your methodology. How does continuous delivery work? Am I going to build my own CI, run my own Jenkins server, or am I going to go to some great company like Circle CI or Travis and outsource CI to them? So you split it where you do the stuff that's you, and you let well-recognized processes like CI and Travis do CI and continuous delivery. The software development process, this is the pure CD, the DevOps process, what used to be called the build manager. This really should be automated. If a team of 7 to 11, let's say the maximum agile team that works is 11, if you're spending 1 or 2 of those guys doing builds and deploying code, there's an issue. That revenue is probably not well spent. And then the purest of DevOps, just deploying stuff to production and managing those deployments and handling logs, absolutely something you shouldn't condition yourself. So in short, I certainly remember the days when if you had the coolest like Puppet, Chef, local environment that was auto-configured that sort of matched production, it was like super thrilling and you could run it on your machine. That's not as cool anymore because it takes tons of time and resources. And there are cloud services that can manage this all for you. I think the biggest development over the past year and a half is the ability for cloud services to spin up very ephemeral environments that absolutely match production. So you see this in Docker, it's obviously how this works in containers, but you also see companies like GitLab and Heroku able to spin up ephemeral environments for testing stuff, for running pull requests that are exact duplicates of your production environment. That you should be doing. The thrill that's in now is just turning those services on. It's thrilling because you can spend your time coding and building your product. The coolest thing, I think, about it is you free people from worrying about and reacting to the sort of baseline security that everyone needs to care about in their development process. You know, software is not invulnerable to bugs. You're always going to have to do patches. But the development process itself is another vector for attack. You know, like how secure is staging? If they can get into staging and you promote from staging to production, did you just promote an exploit? So securing that process is really important. And that's on a human level. Some programmers probably should not have the ability to deploy to production, and some programmers should. Okay. This is, I think, the coolest time and I've been at this a long time. It is just the coolest time to be a developer because the developer tools industry is growing so fast that a really unique thing is happening that these companies are not competing. The market is growing so fast, there's enough customers for Travis, for Circle, for Heroku, for AWS, for Google, that you don't see the sort of like cutthroat dog-eat-dog competition you see like say in social media companies. Like Snapchat is fighting to a death match with Facebook over the next 8 people who don't have some sort of social media environment. DevOps is totally different. It's growing so fast that everyone can sort of cooperate. And I can tell you I handle all the developer experience stuff at Heroku, and we have CI and CD. I have lunch with the head of CI and CD for Travis, for CodeShip, and we talk about like what features we plan to develop next and what users would like. We are not at all worried about like, if you succeed, I'll fail. It's not a zero-sum game. And you guys are the beneficiaries of that because you're the developers. So we're working really hard to make sure all these tools integrate and letting you choose the tools that matter for you and the libraries and the other services that you want to sew into them. So here's an example of that. We're also doing things to make it not just inclusive and like all rainbows for everybody for the sort of privileged people who are in this room, who are like working developers, who make enough money to come to a conference like this, who can travel to Split. There's a huge untapped market of developers in the third world, in Africa, in countries that have differing levels of education, and even like in the United States, in the Deep South, where people don't have a $2,000 MacBook. So we're doing things sort of like this, where if you don't have a powerful computer, if you have a $200 Chromebook, and you can't even run, like you certainly can't compose environments with verisimilitude on the machine, these DevOps companies are just moving everything to the cloud. Here you see the console in the cloud, in case your machine just can't handle it, or in case you're just not the type of person who wants to configure a local machine, but you have a great idea for some software. So these tools are not just designed to be like, take the work out of stuff for you. They're designed to be incredibly simple. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the major workflows and which ones I see trending and which ones I see sort of trending down. There are a lot of companies that can do the workflow part for you, and this is continuous delivery. This is basically your code pipeline, from development to staging to prod, and maybe other steps like QA if you use them. And okay, so where am I gonna go to have a cloud service that's gonna structure and secure this whole thing for me so that I spend my time in my code editor, either in the cloud or on a machine, and perhaps GitHub, my version control system, and then all this stuff is taken care of and secured. So for a long time, GitFlow, this is a methodology that's championed by Atlassian and some other companies. GitFlow has been really popular. GitFlow basically, I assume most people here are familiar with the Git version control system. Successor to Subversion, it's certainly where you should be managing your code, and GitHub and Bitbucket are great options. But you can use both of these with most of these dev tools. The GitFlow methodology means that you create a pretty numerous number of branches. You're running simultaneous feature branches all at the same time. That's cool if you have a lot of developers necessary for each branch, and staging and testing servers are pretty rare and pretty expensive. That is just not the way things are going. Development and staging servers are getting cheaper, and typically teams are getting smaller. You don't have like 3 guys to work on each feature. And you want to test it with the people I talked about, with designers, with managers, with stakeholders, with legal, before it deploys to production. So GitFlow, the problems with GitFlow were addressed by GitHub a few years ago with GitHub Flow. GitHub Flow, you can just see, it's one line. It's much, much simpler. What you do here is you create a feature branch, you test the hell out of it, you iterate, you make some pull requests, you discuss it with your colleagues, and then you deploy it to production. If production fails, you back out. So it's already starting to sound, I can see some people in the audience like, what? It's already starting to sound like this is not a risk-free proposition, deploying this to production. If you're a version control system, this looks like a great idea because backing code out makes sense. But again, this doesn't make as much sense in the last couple of years when ephemeral environments are ephemeral, and especially disposable environments are just really cheap. For a few pennies, you can spin them up, deploy, test, and then spin them down. Okay. So we have all the companies I mentioned, GitLab, CodeShip, Circle, all of them have similar methodologies. Because I work at Heroku, I will tell you about how Heroku proposes you do this. But all of these companies have really good options. So the key thing here is that everything you do, you deploy and test it, even pull requests. So if you guys, how many people, show of hands, like actually use pull requests in the audience? Okay, good. So you know when you make a pull request in GitHub, typically you make the pull request and then you pass the code around to your colleagues and they sort of look at the code, speculate how it might run, and then either approve the pull request or ask for changes, you iterate a bit, and then you merge it into the feature branch or into master. What more modern methodologies add are the ability to actually test that code. And you'll notice now in GitHub, we've been working with GitHub on this. If you use a product like Heroku or GitLab or a few others, when you create a pull request and you've configured the CD environment, you'll see a line in GitHub that says a temporary deployment has been created. And you can click and actually test the code. And the vendors such as Heroku and GitLab and others are spinning up these so-called review apps. This methodology assumes that very cheap, very ephemeral clones of production are available, and this requires that you operate in the cloud. You're kind of getting away from works on my machine and moving to the cloud. And this also dovetails with what I talked about earlier. If you are in Ghana and you're developing an app, you may not have like tons of expensive hardware locally. You'd use it in the cloud. Okay, so I'm going to just go through the process really quickly, how this works. You're in Git, you have a master branch, and you're going to create a feature. So you create a feature branch. And you make some changes, and you commit them. What ephemeral app continuous delivery is recommending is that you create a pull request immediately so that it has an identity and your team has a way to talk about it. The coolest thing about that is because now this review app has a URL, you can send it to your designer, you can send it to the legal department. All these people can actually test the pull request, and then you'll notice the GitHub interface has gotten a lot simpler. Same with Bitbucket. Legal can actually go to GitHub and say, this looks like a copyright violation, before the code is even deployed to a feature branch. This, I'm sure you've all heard this, that Google says and other companies say that the sooner you catch a bug, the cost of the bug decreases exponentially. Here you're catching the bug at the first iteration of the pull request, and you have a more diverse team to catch that bug. You have people, hopefully, of different gender identities, of different races, of different roles, legal, to recognize that something is a bug. You create the review app I talked about, and every time you update the pull request, GitHub talks to GitLab or talks to Heroku and says, update the code, build and deploy this code again, and notify everybody that the code has changed in Slack or HipChat. They get a thing that says, hey, this pull request has changed. The pull request you care about has changed. Click here to see the latest version of the code running, and click here to see the code running, to see the pull request on GitHub. Everybody weighs in. Hopefully, the programmer reacts to the reviewers and changes the code and makes it work. And the branch is ready to merge. This also is automated. This is why it's called continuous delivery, because every time you do something, the software is delivered live. It's delivered to a live running environment. And when you merge that branch, when you merge into master, many of these systems, Heroku included, will build and deploy the code automatically to staging. This is a really big deal. You have all the data you need to test in staging. You have the latest version of the feature. You could roll it back in the unlikely event that it doesn't work. And you can test against all the other services like these image recognition services or 2FA services. You could test it in a real environment. When it works in staging, the key thing here is that you do not rebuild. You promote the compiled artifact. And for those of you who are familiar with the 12-factor methodology, this is a 12-factor compliant way to do it. If you're not, check out on the web 12-factor app. I'd search in Google. There's a bunch of rules for building 12-factor apps, and they are very, very helpful. So here, you promote the code that's already compiled, and you move it to production. So there's no chance of, I built it again, it's a little different, it's the same. And you promote to production. And so then the new app is in production. So you could see how if you do this, you could actually deploy to production pretty safely, maybe like 15 times a day, as some companies do. The Financial Times deploys, I think, 20 times a day to their web presence. Okay, I'm going to really tempt fate, since I have time, and show you a live demo of this happening. Of course it's going to fail because this is a live demo, but we'll try. Okay, so this is what this thing looked like. This is Heroku's version. Again, I'm showing you this one because I know it, but there are many competing products that are equally good. So you see here that it's linked to GitHub. 14 million daily active users on GitHub. It's pretty clear that GitHub is the center of gravity for development, and I think there's about 4 to 6 million daily active users on Bitbucket in a much more corporate market. Also, like a big center of gravity in the version control system. You don't want to force people to switch context between version control and then maybe their CI environment and their CD environment. You could stay in GitHub the whole time. You'll get messages. You could stay here the whole time, depending on your role. If you're like a engineering manager or director of engineering, probably look at this thing. And there are a lot of companies that have this on a giant screen in their office in the engineering section or in the engineering pit so they can see what versions are deployed, where are they running, how can I use them. All right, right now you can see that this is the repo that is attached here. And I'll describe what each of these columns mean. In this case, on the right, we have a bunch of production servers around the world. One's in Germany, one's in Japan, one's in the United States, and we have a staging server that we use. For simplicity here, I have one staging server. On the left here, you can see all the review apps. Every time I create a pull request, the environment generates a review app, and it's fully testable by the whole team. So I'll show you that happening. If I go into GitHub here, first, the coolest thing about this is there's lots of things you can do with the app. And one of the things you can do is see it run in a browser. So let's see this run in a browser. It's not an exciting app, but it's in Go, so it compiles very fast. All right, so that's the app. Let's say I want to make a change to that app. I'll go to GitHub. Here's the repo. And I'll change something really, really silly. And I'm not using, I apologize, I'm not using code anywhere, although I would. I'm coding directly into the interface here, and I'm going to make this purple. And I'm going to open a pull request. Those of you who use GitHub, you recognize this interface. And this is submitted to GitHub, and I decide to open a pull request. The coolest thing here is that, notice when I made the pull request, the deployment environment recognized that I made a pull request. It knows how to create staging into production environments because there's a manifest attached to it for all these systems. And it starts building the code, adding the image recognition add-on, adding the Postgres database, adding rollbar, adding anything you need to make a fully fledged environment, and it builds it in a second. It's just not that fast to manage those sort of things, especially if you consider schema changes on your local environment. And then the cool thing is you can actually see what it looks like. And you can send it to legal. You notice I changed the top to purple. It's purple. And you can send it to design, and they say, oh, okay, that looks great. We can deploy that to staging. So we know, because we're GitHub users, that when something is worth merging into master, that you merge the pull request. And if you're a nice person, you leave a comment. So everybody comments. And notice too that all the actions I'm performing, you can configure this so in Slack, maybe in the channel that's for the team that's working on this app, all this stuff shows up. Hey, somebody made a pull request. Here's where you can look at it. Okay, so I've commented. And everyone's approved. Let's assume there's a bunch of comments, and I merge the pull request. So you'll notice the app just vanished because I'm done with it. The thing that's great for resource-constrained teams is you just paid for that entire development environment for maybe a minute, in this case, maybe a couple hours in a real-world case where the team's working on stuff. So it's incredibly cheap. You're paying typically by the second for these things on Heroku or on AWS. And you'll notice, too, that we've integrated CI into the process. So right now, continuous integration is running because I've integrated the CI system. There's one level of authentication. I can control who gets access to staging, who can submit runs to CI, who can see CI results archivally. There's a lot of permissions around this in modern systems. So you don't have to run a Jenkins server, submit the job to it. Jenkins breaks down. It has 200 add-ons. It's really complex. And you can see here that CI has passed because that wasn't much of a change. The cool thing here is that it's all in the same environment. And more you'll see developers electing just to have a packaged development environment. One reason they do that is, I don't know about here, but in the United States, the average tenure for a developer is 18 months. So every 18 months, you lose a developer and they go down the street to some other company in San Francisco. It's part of what's driving it. You want to be immune to developers leaving and taking knowledge with them about the development process that makes it hard to onboard their replacements. Here, it's all a recognized package. You go to GitLab, you read the docs. You go to Heroku, you read the docs, and honestly, you usually don't even need the docs. It's so obvious. You could teach someone, where's CI? It's the tests tab. Where do I put my tests? In Go, they're in the normal place under function_test.go. Same for Python, etc. So let's go back to the pipeline. And so we can see here that we merged to master, and because we merged to master, that change got deployed to staging, as I described earlier. And if I bust the cache, hopefully I remember how to do that. Oh, I hit reload by accident. If I just take a look at the app in the browser, and I force reload the page, you'll see that the banner is now purple. The code that I just edited a minute ago and discussed with my team is now in staging. So in staging, you do the same thing. Slack tells everybody there's a new version in staging. The environment you don't have to worry about building. The manifest does that. It keeps parity with production. I can talk to people afterwards about well, how do you manage data? How do you move data down? There are ways to do this. That's a longer conversation. So right now, to me, as a long-time IT and software person, this is the most amazing part of the demo, even though it's so simple. Right now, I'm going to promote this slug to production. I'm going to take this code that's already built, and I'm going to make it run in Germany, Japan, 2 US servers, and in a common runtime, so the public sort of environment. And yep, I want to deploy to all these places. So you now take the code that's already built, and you'll see that one by one, depending how far those locations are from Croatia, the code deploys. And you can see that if I open the code in the browser and defeat the cache, that it is purple. So let me go back to my presentation. Okay, live demos don't always work, so I'm happy. We are a little under time. I'm happy to take questions if you have them. I also want to say that the developer evangelism people at Heroku have sent a mountain of t-shirts, like they look like this, they're the same t-shirt I'm wearing, that are available at check-in. If you go down to check-in, you can get a great t-shirt and other Heroku stuff. And I also have, if you want to catch me afterwards, we make available sort of an unlimited number of compute hours to certain companies that are doing things towards social good, or they have an innovative idea, or they are in an area where that's not like in San Francisco. And so I have those codes to give people if you want to come after. Even if you don't have these codes and have just like tons and tons of unlimited free stuff, there's still a lot of free for all these services. You know, Amazon gives away free stuff, Google gives away free stuff, you can use CodeShip to deploy to both of those environments. Heroku gives away a free 100 hours for a month, which is a hell of a lot. And so you can try this stuff right now, and it is not complex. It's designed so that everybody who's from an assembler, the type of person who writes the minimum code and just sews services together, to somebody who's like a hardcore Java person who wants to write it all themselves, they can use the same methodology and focus on the assembling, the coding, that kind of thing. So I will ask for questions if there are any. And if you don't want to ask them, like now. Yep. It's really easy. I mean, a lot of people start on Heroku. You get this pattern of, you guys probably all know Heroku, we've been around forever. So you get this pattern of people who start on Heroku, and it appears to be less expensive than Amazon. It appears to be more expensive than Amazon, sorry, because compute cycles are a bit more expensive, some database services are a bit more expensive. The theory is that you're going to use far less people and have less security problems, so you stay on Heroku. We do get companies that get very, very big, such as one of the big car sharing services that I'm sure you know. And they get so big that they are now spending many, many millions of dollars a month. And so they can afford to hire IT people. It's really easy to move off because your code is SQL, your database is SQL, your code is Go or Java or something else, and you're using really well-recognized services like Rollbar, like New Relic, and you can move that whole package to the new environment and choose a different continuous delivery system, or in some cases you're so big it actually does make sense to build your own. But we have plenty of people move off Heroku every day, and that's great. Like, we want people to innovate and do cool stuff on Heroku. We have many Fortune 500 companies who stay, but when people leave, it like often makes sense. Oh, yes?
The thing is, it's working with GitHub at the moment. Sorry. Okay, thanks. So the demo you showed us is quite cool, and at the moment it works great with GitHub, but blocker for example, my company is that Bitbucket, it's not supported as much as GitHub. So my question is there a plan in the roadmap, or like when can we expect to have the same integration with Bitbucket?
Yep. So I hope this is being recorded. I am also, my last job was as the PM of Bitbucket, so it is a product that I absolutely love. I love when people ask this question. Yes, we are going to support Bitbucket in the near future. Just when I take it up the chain, I can say, we got a lot of questions from the audience about Bitbucket. We got to do it. You had a question?
Thank you for the great talk. So my question is very similar to the previous one, but more about the things like when you create environments, disposable environments, just to test a pull request, so to have something that you can easily show everybody. I guess this is very well integrated on the Heroku platform itself, but right now, is there any way to spin up, for example, I don't know, serverless things or AWS or DigitalOcean or whatever other architecture you use in the company?
So there are great products like you guys probably know about GitLab, a great, really cool European company that is growing so fast I can't believe it, and they have just introduced review apps. It's actually former Heroku people who went to GitLab who are building some of the disposable environments there, and they work in a very similar way. It's a bit more configuration. It's more maintenance because Amazon in general is just lots of manualness. But if you slog through that, you can do absolutely the same thing. You might not get like a really pretty board that looks like Trello and does all that sort of stuff, but you can do the same stuff. So this is interesting. I don't know in the near term if we're going to deploy to environments other than the Heroku environment. This is sort of like, this is always a tension in software. Like if you have an Apple application, you have really high reliability and you know it's great, but Apple is really strict about what they allow in their marketplace. This is a similar thing. We're not quite as crazy as Apple, but when we control the deployment environment, we can do lots of things to replicate it and to dispose of it really efficiently. Now, having said that, we have a lot of customers who use Amazon Postgres, who use lots of Amazon services that are connected to Heroku deployment environments. And in many cases, the app is just sort of a thin UI over the database. It's really the database you care about. We're happy to have you use Amazon or another database vendor. Okay, you guys, please, if you want all the stuff that Developer Evangelism gave me, go to the reception area so I do not have to cart it all back 5,000 miles to California. That would be awesome. And because I want you to have it. All right, thanks a lot, everybody.